The market was supposed to crash. It was supposed to be affordable again. It was the day of reckoning for the investors, the realtors, the developers, and it was supposed to finally be the long overdue win for the have-nots. And in this video, I'm going to be covering the list of things that was supposed to crash the market, and then what's on the agenda for what's supposed to crash the market next. Kicking this video off with the pandemic. So the pandemic hit, the economy shut down, unemployment skyrocketed, and I distinctly remember CMHC putting out an article stating that the real estate market was supposed to go down 18%. Fast forward literally 5 months later, and prices were at the beginning of their meteoric rise. Next after that, we had the mortgage forbearance period, and a lot of you people probably don't even remember this. This is probably a memory that you have to dig out of the back of your mind. But the government rolled out the mortgage forbearance period, allowing people to basically defer their mortgage and not pay it for, I think it was 3 months or something like that. But at the end of this period, the narrative at that time was that all the people that deferred their mortgages were not going to be able to now pay their mortgages because a bunch of them didn't have jobs or whatever the case was. And obviously that didn't materialize because prices went to the moon pretty much immediately thereafter. Next on the list, we have higher interest rates. Higher interest rates were expected to start going up in 2022, which they did, and everyone thought that this was going to crash the market. Now, in hindsight, the market did actually crash. Some suburbs going down as much as 40%, but I guess that wasn't enough for some people because more people were calling for a crash after the crash had happened. And also the market didn't actually crash because of higher interest rates. It crashed from buyer fatigue and the fear of higher interest rates. Regardless, the market never crashed because of higher interest rates, unless you want to count the crash where it actually did crash, which for some reason I guess we're not. Now, at the same time this was happening, we were worried about inflation because inflation at this time was hitting, I think it was 8.8% or 9% or something like that. We were worried about the cost of goods and services going up so much to the point where people weren't going to be able to pay their mortgages because they're so busy paying for everything else. And this would completely kill the purchasing power of the buyers out in the market, and there would be no buyers to buy any of the homes. And that was supposed to crash the market, so that never did. And next on the list, going into early 2023, there was a lot of talks around a deadly recession that was supposed to hit in the spring, and that was going to crash the market. And as you guys know, aside from the actual recession that we had, technically, we have yet to have a recession. That never materialized, and prices actually went up like 12% in the spring. And then after that, we had the SVB debacle. The Silicon Valley Bank basically collapsed, went bankrupt, and that sparked fears of contagion. Basically, this collapse was going to issue through the entire economy, causing a bunch of other banks to collapse, and then all of those ripples were again going to cause the housing market to, as you guessed, crash. And at this time, I was actually working with several buyers who pulled out and decided not to buy because they were worried about the contagion. Oh, and by the way, in between several of these events during this entire time frame, we were worried about new variants that kept popping up. So every time there was a new variant, it was, we're going back on lockdown, market's gonna crash, blah, blah. And I don't know how many times that happened, but it was at least 2 or 3. Next, I think it was going into the middle of 2023, we started worrying about World War III. World War III was supposedly going to happen, and you could probably guess what people were saying what the result of World War III was going to be, and that never happened. Next, towards the end of 2023, the bond market soared. Fixed rates were around 6%. People were calling for 10% interest rates at this time. And surely this time, that was going to be what caused the crash. Shortly thereafter, the bond market sold off, not before I bought my house at 6.8% 2-year fix, but right after that, the bond market sold off and interest rates went back down into the low 5s to the high 4s. And then those concerns were quickly put to bed. Now, going into 2024, we had what you would call the mortgage renewal crisis on the horizon. I think it was like $70 billion worth of mortgage renewals across Canada were supposed to come up in 2024. Take that number with a grain of salt. Now, mortgage delinquencies did rise, but not to the effect that everybody thought was going to happen. The bond market also dropped so much that it ended up not really being a concern, because if you had bought your house in 2019, your mortgage rate was like 2.5%, 3%. And yeah, it's scary if you're renewing at 6, but now you're renewing in the high 4s, and when you bought that house in 2019, you were stress tested at 5.25 anyways. So again, the mortgage renewal crisis never materialized. And after that, we had the fears that the Canadian dollar would tank as the BOC started cutting rates, but the Fed never did. However, the Fed did just cut 50 basis points, which again have kind of quelled these fears for now. Now, those are the 50 market crashes that never actually happened. What are the next market crashes that are up on the horizon? Here's what I'm hearing. So the first one is that inflation is going to return and because they're cutting rates, and that's basically going to spur another rate hike cycle, which is possible. So we'll have to see what happens there. Next, we have World War III again, right? Just like the new variants that kept coming back, those concerns kept resurfacing. World War III is back and people are concerned about this. And lastly, we have unemployment, right? Unemployment is supposedly going to skyrocket over 10%. Homeowners will stop paying their mortgages, renters will stop paying rent, and again, this is going to crash the market. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm starting to see a pattern here. This market has been insanely resilient and it's starting to seem like the worst is already past us. But I don't know, maybe the pattern finally does break this time and we see this elusive crash that everyone's been talking about for 40 years. Now, the point of this video is that there is always a new crash concern. Like almost every 3 months, there's a new way that the market's gonna supposedly crash. And I would suggest that you don't make decisions based off of the worst case scenario happening. You plan for the worst, but hope for the best. You don't let the worst case scenario impede you from making decisions. For example, if I'm buying a house right now, I'm gonna be thinking about things like, if I lose my job right now, how long can I survive without making an income? How likely is it that I would even lose my job and have no income? If inflation does return and we get a second rate hike cycle, maybe instead of taking that 2-year mortgage, banking on the fact that I'm gonna get a lower mortgage rate in 2 years, why don't I just take a 5-year? Take a 5-year term that's long enough that if there is another rate hike cycle, I pretty much bypass the entire thing. Rates have already gone back up and they've come back down by the time I have to renew. And then World War III is just one of those things, like, if it happens, it happens. Like, you're gonna have bigger concerns instead of just, you're gonna be worried about not dying as opposed to paying your mortgage and people that you love not dying, right? I don't even know if I'd factor that into my decision-making process, because if that were to happen, you're gonna be worried about way more worse things happening in your life than your house. But do what you want to do or what you need to do, but just weigh the possibilities and take a calculated risk. You don't let the downside scenario impede you entirely from taking the risk. You just plan accordingly for the risk. And I get that you don't have to buy real estate. Like, there's other things you can do with your money, but if you've already made the decision to buy real estate, then these are the things that you should be thinking about. Now, if you're thinking about buying or selling, I get millions of views across my social media platforms. If you follow me on YouTube, you haven't seen my Instagram and TikTok, that's my thing. YouTube is secondary, but my main gig is TikTok and Instagram. And when it comes to selling people's homes, I get millions of views. I sell about 20 to 30% of my listings right off my Instagram or TikTok. So if you're into trying something different, getting a little bit more exposure on your property, call me, book a call, text me, whatever the case may be. I'm that Agent Kelly. I'm making moves to move you.